Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Replay Office Hours. I am Cecilia Martinez. I am the community lead here at Replay. Thanks so much for joining us. Today you may notice that we are on a new platform, so bear with us as we kind of navigate this, and let me know if you notice any issues, like if you have any trouble hearing us, anything like that. Feel free to let us know. Whether you're watching on Twitter, Twitch, or on YouTube, you can add comments in the chat and ask us some questions. We'll be checking those throughout the broadcast in order to make sure that all your questions about anything replay or debugging related get answered. So awesome. Yeah, so thanks so much again for joining. Want to start off just by, again, reiterating that you can now watch these streams on any platform. So depending on where you're watching today, you can check out Replay.io on Twitch and Twitter. You can always reach us on Twitter, or you can go to replay.io/YouTube to check out our YouTube channel. We will be adding, if you go to our YouTube channel now, you can actually see all of our previous episodes have been uploaded. So you can check out old episodes if you missed them. On Twitch, we do have some highlights if you wanted to check out just certain topics. And then going forward, all of the episodes will be available on these platforms for you. So yes, let us know if you, like I said, have any questions or see any technical issues, and we'll be checking the chat. So yeah, I also wanted to say that today we have a guest with us. So I know we tried this before, it didn't quite work. So I'm excited to have somebody from the engineering team today on stream to chat with us about Replay. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce here. Josh, you want to say hi?
Hello. Hey, I'm Josh. Yeah, I'm an engineer at Replay. And this is probably my official Twitch stream debut, I think. I don't think I've ever been on a stream before. So it's very exciting.
Well, very honored to have you here. Yes, Oliver, A-lister. So, I agree. It was very exciting. So yeah, so recently Josh and I actually worked together on a blog post. If you read that last week about how he debugged a use effect, React hook use effect bug. So if you follow along with the Replay blog or on Twitter, you probably would have seen that. But if not, you should check it out. It's a good example of how things like use effect and other types of React hooks can potentially cause issues, make it a little bit harder to debug, but luckily with Replay, makes it easier for you. So yeah, Josh, how long have you been on the team? You want to tell us a little bit about your experience with Replay?
Yeah, I started working with Replay last October. Came on and mostly worked on the front end for most of last year. And then this year have been doing a lot of front end work and also sort of diving into the back end and learning how everything happens sort of behind the curtain, which has been really fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so Replay is like a lot of it is open source. Do you have history kind of working on open source projects before, or is that something that's new for you?
I've contributed to a fair number of open source projects, but I've never really been a maintainer. I was technically a maintainer of a Python testing library a long time ago because I started contributing to it, and the person who maintained it said, I actually have no interest in being the maintainer, so I'm going to make you admin. But that never really went anywhere. And as far as I know, nobody uses it anymore. So yeah, this is my first time like really actively committing every day to an open source project. I did a fair amount of work when I was at Thoughtbot. We had a lot of open source repos that I would kind of regularly contribute to. But yeah, this is mostly a new experience.
Nice. Yeah, so, I kind of come from a little bit of open source experience myself, but it's been really exciting to see that we've had some more contributors recently in the community kind of checking out some of the open issues that we have. If y'all aren't familiar, we do have a Replay Discord where the entire team works there in public. I'll be kind of talking about that a little bit later some more as well. But you can join us, replay.io/Discord. All the engineers, designers, the entire team is in there chatting about how we're going to approach different issues, like working on bugs, just chatting about how to design certain new features that are coming out. And so it's a really great place if you are interested in contributing to check out, come out, like ask us any questions that you have. So actually, the first thing that I do want to do is kind of recognize a contributor that we had this week. Started doing this last week, and I as a contributor shout out section on the stream. So
nice.
Wanted to kind of do that. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Awesome. Oh, that just worked. I love that. Okay. Yeah, so this was a bug that we had, and it was an issue with the progress bar. You kind of lose that whenever you're scrolling. So there's actually a contributor that we had last week too, Jonathan, and he's picking up another issue right away this week. Was able to get that fixed, and it was really awesome. Love seeing that kind of collaboration that's happening. And if you are interested, like I said, in contributing to open source, there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. It doesn't have to be as a code fix. If you're able to do that, that's great. If not, though, there's a lot of other ways that you can help out. So one of those is checking out GitHub issues and seeing, what could have a replay added, like what could have like if there's anything that you can do to help kind of debug any of these issues. So we do have the good first issues label. That is, if you are looking to contribute code and you want to dig into the code base, you can check those out. And then I also wanted to point out, though, that we do have this label called has replay. So if you take a look, those might be some where you can at least start to initially debug, even if you don't feel comfortable digging into the code just yet. The has replay will actually show that it has like a replay of the bug. So you can go in, you can add some comments, you can start poking around the code. I personally find that replay is a good way to like learn a code base. That was how I kind of got started when I joined the team, is just checking out some replays, clicking around without a little bit of the daunting task of pulling down an entire repo and like running it locally and hoping that it works and dealing with environment issues. So you can definitely check those out. The other thing that you can do, though, is you can come into our issues repo, and anything that doesn't have a replay, you can record one and add it to the issue. And not just with our repository, but with any open source project, that's a great way to contribute, is providing reproducible bug reports. So you can reproduce the bug, record it in a replay, add the replay to the ticket, and that it becomes very helpful when debugging. And Josh, I don't know if you can speak a little bit to the difference of like when you have a replay versus when you don't have a replay and are approaching a bug.
Oh yeah, it's an enormous difference. Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's done any engineering or any product engineering has had the experience of having someone come to you and say, I clicked on this button and nothing happened, or I tried to do this and it didn't work. And it's like, well, that's extremely vague. I have actually no idea how to help you. I would love to fix that thing, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And with replay, somebody can actually come to you and say like, I tried to click on this button and I don't think it worked. And by the way, if you want to see exactly what was actually going on in the browser at that moment, here's a replay. And yeah, it's absolutely just a world of difference when you're about to dive in. Knowing that you like don't even have to try and reproduce yourself, and instead you can just hop in. And if you open a replay and there's comments, that's like A plus, because a lot of times it will take you 30 seconds or a minute to actually get your reproduction down. And I think most people on the team at Replay do this because it's just so helpful when you're opening it up. It's like, find where that reproduction is and just leave a comment there saying like, this is what I was doing, this is what I expected. And extra brownie points if you go and find in the code what was going on at that time. But even just having any comment on the timeline to say it happens here is like a huge difference.
Yeah, and I think like for me, I'm a note taker. Like whenever I'm learning something, I love to take notes. So even if I'm just like myself debugging in a replay, if I notice anything or like I learn something or I discover something, I'll just add a comment to remind myself, because chances are I'm going to end up getting distracted, come back to that like a few hours later and be like, wait, what was I doing again? And that those comments can kind of just like be those breadcrumbs for you as you go through. So
yeah, definitely. Also, I don't know, like for me, the thing that's really discouraging is when you are either tracking down a bug or learning a new code base and you have 12 tabs open in your editor and they all have like kind of similar names. And you like, what I end up doing is like, I use Vim. So I'm just like control Oing, like previous position, and just like jumping through all these files to try and figure out like, oh, where was I 30 seconds ago that like had what looked like meaningful code for the thing that I just found. And with Replay, as you go through those files, you can just annotate and say, this is where I think this thing happens that I'm interested in. I'm not 100% sure that that's actually the case, but I think it's around here. And that comment is a shortcut for you to jump back to that context clue whenever you need it. It's a huge, huge help.
Yeah, and not having to like refine the source file or like which
Yeah.
subdirectory it was in. It just jumps right to that. And a lot of people don't realize too, but you can also edit comments and delete them. So if you find that a comment's not helpful anymore, like I'll just add it for now, and then I can always change it later if I realize that I understood it wrong initially or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you're talking about Command Oing and like all these shortcuts and everything, and that leads me actually into my next topic, which is talking about some of the new things that we're working on. And one of those is this keyboard accessibility project, where we want developers to have an experience that's really in line with other tools that they're used to using. And so we have some keyboard shortcuts. Some of them we're kind of working only in certain areas or not as you would expect. And so we have been working on improving that and having that better align with other tools. So one of the things that we did add this week, and I'll go ahead and go back to sharing my screen, is console search. So, when you're within a source file, we kind of already had this. You could do Command F and you can find in file. So that little box pops up on the bottom. So same kind of thing now when you're in the console, when you're focused here. I have this replay open and it's got a lot of events. I'm showing all of the mouse enter events. And we could filter the output, but let's say like I want to see everything in context, but I want to be able to highlight something. So again, like when you're in the console here, now you can do Command F and you can find strings within those logs. So if I really want to find like the mouse enters that have to do with panel, I can like search that here and I can start to highlight that through. Or let's say that I want to do like my validate. So I have validate and it highlights here and I can toggle through all my different validate functions. So again, that's just going to kind of highlight in the console what line you want to search for, as opposed to filtering, which is actually going to clear everything out that's not related to that. So in this case, I care about the other things that are happening around my validate, but I just wanted to be able to hone in and find it in my console. So in addition, we also have added some global some search functionalities that were previously only in DevTools. Now we in viewer mode. So now from viewer, you can do Command P to search for a file, and this will actually open the file in DevTools. Same thing now with Command O. So this is your function search. So actually, I talked to somebody recently who didn't realize that we had function search specifically. So this is a pretty good call out. If you actually know the name of the function that you're looking for, but not like what file it's in or where to find it, you can do Command O and you can like say like, okay, I want the validate for page refresh function. And that'll go ahead and take you right over to the DevTools. It'll open up the source and it'll take you to that function. So again, if you are looking for a function, not sure where in the file source to find it, you can use Command O to do function search. And we are making that a more consistent experience, no matter what view you're in or kind of what pane that you're focused in. So
that Command P change is, it sounds like a small thing, but for me, it was actually extremely exciting because for months I have been opening up a replay, hitting Command P, expecting to open up the file editor and accidentally opening up the print page dialog, and then having to close that, open up DevTools and hit Command P again. So I was actually very, very excited for that change. And it's those little things that just like not throwing people out of their flow is like, that's our goal when we're building tools. So yeah, it's a bigger change than it seems like.
yeah, I mean, it all goes back to that just developer experience of, is it like when you are working in the tool, is what you expect to happen going to happen? And we think a lot about that. And that's something that we talk a lot about too. Like in our Discord, in our design channel and our development channel, we talk a lot about kind of that developer experience and some of the rough edges where you do encounter something like that, where it throws you out of your flow. So we love hearing feedback too. So if you ever experience anything like that, like these kinds of things come from users who say, hey, like I kept opening the wrong thing, or I expected this to work and it didn't. And that's how we, make the experience better and better. So we love getting that kind of feedback. So definitely let us know. So awesome. Yeah, so typically the kind of format that we do is we'll talk about some of the things that we worked on recently, and then we also like to talk about things that we're going to be working on. So I want to just highlight a couple of quick roadmap insights that we have coming up. The first one is the Replay Chrome extension. So we have submitted this to the Chrome Web Store to be an extension. So this is really exciting. It hasn't been released yet, but this is something that we've been working on, and it's essentially what it will do. It's an extension. I don't know if Josh, if you have anything to add, but it's essentially an extension where when you're in Chrome and you encounter a bug, which is common, right? People don't usually use the Replay browser as their default browser. But you're working in Chrome, you encounter a bug, the extension will essentially let you click one button, open up the Replay browser to the URL that you are at that you just experienced. That way you can just start recording and reduce that friction of opening up the browser, like typing in the URL, whatever it may be. So that's something that we've heard people ask for. And we really think about, again, how we can keep you in that state of flow, like when you do encounter a bug, and encourage people to submit more bugs. So like, how many times have you encountered a bug and you're like, I don't know if it's worth it, like try and reproduce it. But so yeah, Josh, I don't know if you worked on it at all, or if you have anything you want to add.
No, I remember talking about this for months and us kind of saying like, oh, we should probably do that. And then I think, it was really exciting when I think it was Gerald just eventually was like, oh, I'm going to try it, and kind of like threw something together in a couple hours. And it was like, this is actually pretty close. We can get this over the finish line. And yeah, I think it is actually kind of a big difference. A thing that definitely happens to me with some regularity beyond just like opening Replay and then having to like copy and paste the URL you are on is like having that page load and then realizing, oh crap, I forgot to actually hit the record button. So that like navigate to the page and immediately start recording, just cutting out those steps feels really good.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Yeah. And so again, once that's released, we'll definitely announce it, but keep an eye out for that. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is a project that it's ongoing, but it's called Library 1.5. And I'm going to drop a link in the chat. Just give me a second to do that here. We have 3 platforms to drop links in now, which is kind of cool. So this is Library 1.5. We do have a Notion doc here that we're working out of. So John Bell, our designer, just amazing, like UX extraordinaire person, does a lot of things, but is working through and likes to document all of this. And this is where we're essentially updating our library to work better with busy libraries and for CI scenarios. So I've talked on the stream before about how you can record playwright tests with Replay in CI. As you can imagine, what that does is it creates a lot of replays because you have a replay for every test if you're uploading everything or every failed test. But after several runs, that can be, we want to make this so where you can make it easier to organize it, filter it, search it. And once you start digging into this stuff, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. And so I previously was at Cypress, which is a test runner, and have some insight into how people use CI, how people review test results that came from CI, and what kind of is helpful information can be gleaned from that. So there's a whole thread in here, and I love how John documents all of this. But there's a whole Discord thread, and there's a bunch of Loom videos about us going back and forth about how we wanted to organize this library. And so, yeah, it's going to be really exciting. You're going to be able to kind of sort by like which build. So if you wanted to see all the test runs associated with a certain build, and then also be able to sort by test. So if you wanted to see the test history and the performance history across time of how a test performed, and then be able to open replays from that. So, so definitely check that out. If I've heard a lot of people say that recording in CI is something that's interesting to them. So, and let us know if you have any feedback, what kind of designs would be helpful for you. But yeah, this Library 1.5, it's a public Notion. Again, all of the Discord threads in there, all the Loom videos in there are all public. And so you can check out what we're working on there as well.
And that CI use case is it's really cool. That was one of the things that stuck out to me when I first joined the team at Replay was whenever there's a failed test, you just get a replay automatically to go along with it because we record all of our end-to-end tests as they run. And as someone who is new to the project, it was totally mind-blowing to me to be like, oh, you don't have to run the test again, so you don't have to worry about whether or not it's going to be flaky. And you can actually step back in time and ask what was going on in this test right before the failed assertion or right at the failed assertion. It's a game changer. I think once people experience that, they're going to be very in love with this idea.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we were talking recently about how when you have a failed test, right, the first thing is is it a real failure?
Right.
Like is it something that's flaky with the environment, with the network request, or is it like something a real issue? So with the replay, you can kind of quickly like review that and see, okay, yeah, it's something with the source code or it's something with the environment. And then if it is something with the source code, then you already have everything that you need to then debug the actual issue. So it lets you accomplish both of those things in one go. So that's really exciting for me. I definitely worked with a lot of people on their test suites, and intermittent tests or flaky tests is a huge pain point. I think we've all
For
felt that
sure.
at some point in our lives, for sure. So being able to help people with that is super exciting. So awesome. So the next thing I want to dig into, I'm just going to check the chat and make sure we don't have any questions here. Awesome. Oh yeah, I can just check it in here. This is great. Sorry. Okay, awesome. Josh, I want to talk about code heat maps.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this is something, it's a newer feature. It's also a roadmap item, like 2-for-1 kind of topic here. So I know that I've presented on it recently on the stream, but can you give us a little bit of a breakdown about like where code heat maps is now and then where it's headed?
Yeah. Just to give like a little bit of background on it, the idea here is a lot of people, when they first open up a replay, want to know like what lines in a file got run and how many times they got run, because as a developer, when you're reading through a file, it might be 500 lines long, and there's a good chance that you don't care about all 500 lines of it. So being able to say, oh, this function is 20 lines long, the lines are kind of dense, but they were all hit 0 times, so I just don't have to worry about it. It's like a huge, really nice thing to have. And the way that we used to do this is we would basically ask for every single line as you hovered over it, like run through the replay, ask how many times that particular execution position was hit, and then report back the length of that thing to you. But that takes a little bit of time. And so the experience you'd have as a developer is kind of like mousing over the file and sort of wait for half a second here, wait for half a second here, wait for half a second here, and eventually be like, oh, I just want to know all this information at once. So the idea behind code heat maps is we actually can do that. We can load all those things at once, as long as we are willing to compromise on like some other stuff, like the volume of data that we get back and the specificity of it. And where it is right now is we have backend support for it, and it is in the protocol. So if you go to our protocol documentation, you'll see a get hit counts, which is synonymous with what we call code heat maps. And we currently use it for, I would say, most files that people open up. It tends to struggle a little bit with large minified files because it is fetching everything all at once. But for like smaller files that are written by a human, it is probably being used. Yeah, you'd have to actively go in and turn it off if you didn't want to be using it.
Okay. And is that something that is like an experimental setting, or is it something where it just kind of, it's already, you just open up replay and it works?
Yeah, so at the moment, it is an experimental setting, but it's a setting that defaults to on. So it's an experiment that you are opted into, and you can opt out of it if you want to. And I'm really excited about it because I think this current iteration is not that different from what we had before. It's a slightly faster version of what we had before, but it allows us to do much, much more interesting things in the future, because fetching all of the data about what code was run during a particular replay all at once allows you to do things like say how much test coverage you have. It allows you to do things like displaying in the editor directly, like folding up the bodies of functions that were never hit across all of the files, or literally removing folders from your directory, or just graying them out and saying, you don't need to look here, this code wasn't used. So all these things are possible, and I think like very exciting.
Yeah, awesome. I think I think of heat maps, I think of something where it's like if you had the option to even like color code like red lines and yellow lines and
Yes.
like that kind of thing based on how often that line was hit.
Yeah, and that was the original goal behind the feature. It's still one of the goals behind the feature, but it is the kind of thing where we got through building the back end for it. We're like, great, we're going to come back and build the rest of the things for the front end on top of this, and we just haven't quite gotten there yet. There's
Yeah.
been more other exciting things to work on, but
And I imagine there's a lot of like UI decisions that go into that too. Like how do you display it? How do you make sure it doesn't get in the way?
yeah,
So, and I know one of the other things that we're working on right now is also things like for the console, being able to highlight certain lines. Like I
yeah.
saw something about a unicorn emoji,
Yeah,
like
John's
on
really excited about the unicorn emoji. Yeah.
yeah. So maybe heat maps is like flame emojis. There's probably something fun we could do with it. So
Yeah. Yeah, it is really cool. The initial use case that made a ton of sense was show me things that were never hit. The other one that's super common that I use a lot is show me stuff that was hit just an absurd number of times. So, if you're like, oh, I suspect that we're spending a lot of time in this file that we probably don't need to be, a really easy way to find out is just to be like, well, most of these lines were hit 3 times and this one was hit like 300,000 times. So like if there's a problem in performance, it's probably in here somewhere. And just having that called out to you at a high level when you're thinking about performance is super helpful for that, like finding a needle in a haystack moment.
yeah, for sure. And just to kind of show, what this looks like, right? So this is one of like a replay that I use constantly. It's just like a fun just divide by zero React calculator example. I like it because it doesn't have too much going on, and you don't have like 10,000 hits. But as I hover over each line, it's like this really instant experience, like where it's not saying indexing or it's not saying load, like it just kind of it is showing how many times an item is hit. Well, the other part that comes along with it too is when you're in the source view. So in this source explorer view, we have what's called the outline. This will show all the functions within a given file. And you can see next to it the number of times that that function has executed. So kind of like what you were just saying, this render function of my button is running 171 times.
Right.
So, I don't like, you can kind of judge if that's a lot, if that's more than you would expect, given like how often that you're refreshing or like re-rendering the DOM there. So that can kind of give you some insight into like, hey, like that seems like more than it should be, and try and figure out why. And just to give an example of if you don't see this kind of stuff, right? So the eBay example that we were talking about earlier, I'm going to dig into a little bit. Here we have a lot of function calls, and we're not seeing those function counts. So like, Josh, could you explain like why this might happen essentially?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different levels of detail that you could go to here, but a thing that happens a lot in minified files is that you will ask for how many locations a particular part of the code. So, like most people will think about the code in terms of like characters and words. And to the computer, it looks a little blockier than that, right? So most of the words get tokenized, the boundaries between tokens, things like points or parentheses that are opening up for function calls. Those are kind of more the like discrete boundaries for the computer. And in some of those locations, when you ask for how many hits there are, we'll say like, well, okay, actually, if I want to answer you how many hits those are, first I need to go find all of the other locations, because sources are often the source that you're looking at is not actually necessarily the source that like got run in the browser. And when you are done doing this mapping, you can end up with a lot of locations, especially for like a minified file. If you think about everything being sort of compacted down as much as possible, you can have a lot of places where you could break up that code very densely populated. And so what happens on the replay side is we sort of say, oh, can we go grab all of the hit counts for all of the positions in this file? And our backend basically says like, that's way too much stuff. Like there's no way that I'm going to be able to answer that question without slowing everything else down. So it sort of gives up. And this is a like known limitation, but it points at sort of an interesting next step in the heat map evolution. So for the outline view, what we're actually doing is every time you see a function definition in the abstract syntax tree, or what we call the AST, every time you see a function definition in the AST, you say like, what's the first position that would have been executed if this function had run? And like, however many times that position was hit, that's how many times the function was called. So for each of these functions, which we already had because we have this source outline view, we can say, what's the first position, and then look up that position's hit count. An interesting thing is that right now, our the way that we decide what positions to ask for when we look at a file is we just ask for everything.
Yeah.
And that's actually kind of a naive approach, because execution doesn't happen randomly, right? Execution has to happen also much in a tree-like fashion. So if you think about looking at let's look at line.
I can make this bigger too.
Yeah, I think I'm looking for like a good if statement. Yeah, okay. So like on line 28, right? Line 28, there's an and check. So C and if C is false here, we're not going to do the rest of this stuff.
Right.
So all of these calls on like line 29 and 30, those can happen at most the number of times that line 28 happens. They can't happen more because you have to go to line 28 before you can go to line 29. And likewise, you can't go to line 28 until you get to line 23, which is the beginning of that function. So there's no way that line 28 can be called more number of times than line 23 was called.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that you can do is you can eliminate entire function bodies by asking, was the first line of this function hit? So basically for each function in the source outline, you could say, what's the first position in this function? Was it ever hit? And if the answer is 0, I don't need to ask about any of the rest of the positions in that function body because they couldn't possibly be more than 0.
You can just kind of bail out, basically.
Yeah, exactly. You can bail out early and not ask for them. And actually, I should correct something that I said, which is it is possible for something inside of a function body to be called more like greater number of times than the function body itself if you're returning a function, which later gets called by others. But if the number is 0, then there's no way because you have to at least get to the place where you would define the closure.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting insight and an optimization that I'm excited to make. And it's also kind of funny because it makes the backend much more efficient, but it reflects what the feature is doing, right? So as a developer, when I parse a file, one of the things I'm going to look at is how many times was this function hit? And if the answer is 0, then I don't need to read the body. And what we're basically doing is teaching the computer the same thing. Stop looking for everything inside of this function body. First, look at the beginning and see if that was hit any times. And if the answer is 0, you don't need to worry about the rest. So it's kind of an interesting, the insights are kind of going back and forth between how the computer views things and how the developer views things.
Yeah, and it's the same thing when you're debugging, right? And then you're in that process, you can say, okay, this didn't run, that's not going to be an issue. I don't have to worry about that function. Yeah. And really, when we think about that process of elimination when it comes to debugging, right? It's you want to be able to narrow it down and narrow down your scope as tightly as possible to where the error may occur. And if you can remove anything from that, that view, and you can say and throw it out, then that just makes that process easier. And whether you're debugging, whether you're rendering whether it's a computer doing it, whether it's a person doing it. So yeah, that's really cool. It's really cool to kind of hear about all those optimizations that may come as well, or that are going to be coming down the line, because that also just improves the overall performance experience, all that fun stuff.
Totally.
So. Awesome. Great. Yeah. So thanks so much for digging into that. Anything else that you would want to add around code heat maps, or any specific comments that you would want from people around it?
I would love to hear how people think it will make sense to display what things got run, how much. One of the things I've been thinking about is what would it look like if we made lines transparent according to how many times they were hit or weren't hit. So as you get hit more times, your opacity goes up. So it's more obvious that line was important. And I think that's kind of a nice idea of saying this was run once, so you can read it if you squint a little bit, but this was run 1,000 times. So maybe focus here. So I think there's some interesting things like that. And the other thing I would say is that, this is not a complicated piece of our API. I mean, it's complicated in the backend implementation, but in terms of calling the actual thing, it's just one method, and you can call it and get back all of the information about that whole file, basically. And one of the beautiful things about that is our protocol is open source. The documentation for exactly how it works, all of the function signatures is open source. The package that you can use to access it over WebSockets is open source. So it is very easy. If you have an idea for a feature that you think you could build on top of this, it's pretty easy to pull down that package, make a recording of your own, and then just start playing with it. And I think, yeah, you just posted that protocol examples, and that's perfect. One of our engineers, Mark, did exactly that. Shortly after heat maps was done, Mark kind of had this light bulb moment where he was like, wait, if you do that, then you can record a test and then see how many lines it hits during the test. And I think he built that feature in like an evening. And that example is in that repo.
Yeah, super exciting to think about all the implications of like, if you had data of everything that happened when during that session, like what would you want to use it for? And obviously, like there's so many ways that you can answer that question, and super excited to kind of see what people think of, or what people come up with. So very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Josh, for those insights. That's super interesting. One of the my favorite things about just being on this team and is being able to like be a part of these conversations and think about these hard problems. And that's also why I love like our Discord, is because I feel like you can just get access to all of that kind of behind the scenes shop talks stuff just by being in there. So yeah, super exciting. So the rest of the time that we have, I wanted to dig into this like eBay recording that I keep hopping over to. You're welcome to stick around, Josh, if you want to comment on anything. But again, thank you so much for your time and for joining us on stream, answering questions.
Totally.
And,
I think I will drop, but thank you for having me.
Awesome.
And I'm happy to have finally been a star on a show. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for making Replay your Twitch debut.
Of course.
Very
It's
honored.
my pleasure.
All right, thanks so much, Josh.
Have fun.
Cheers. All right, so like I mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and dig into this replay. So we like to do some live debugging, live kind of investigations, just to show what this process looks like. So to show what I've been doing so far, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen here, get back to that. And let's do, yeah, there we go. All right, and I'm going to start by looking at the viewer. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start with a clean slate here. I'm going to close all my source files, make sure it's nice and pretty, as if I was coming into this kind of fresh and new. So this is a replay that was made by Jason, our CEO on the team, Jason Laster. Probably have mentioned him before. You can catch him on Twitter. But this is a replay of the eBay site of essentially updating the quantity of an item and then trying to add it to cart. So we can see that, it says underneath, like, please enter a quantity of 1. It says last one on the screen here. We can kind of like hone in on certain spots. And we can see he's updating the quantity to 2. And then also to 5. And what's happening, though, is it's letting him click the add to cart button, but it's not actually executing. So this is something where typically you would expect there to be some kind of modal or error message that pops up. But, as far as understanding, like if you wanted to come in and say like, okay, let's add some better error handling here, or let's show a reason, or let's disable the button if we can't add to cart. That's something where we can dig into the code and kind of get a better sense of like why this is happening. Why is it not letting us actually add to cart? As a user, we may be able to kind of make those connections that it has to do with the quantity, but nothing's actually popping up to see. So we started off by recording this replay, and you can see all the different points on the screen as we're going through. And I'm going to go ahead and hop over to DevTools. So helpfully, Jason likes to add a lot of comments to a replay as he's going through and debugging. So we'll use some of those as a little bit of a guide. I also did find some additional things here too. So a couple of things to note. This was recorded from eBay's website. So it's a production environment. So we have this minified code. That's what we've been looking at this entire time. I do want to note that with replay, you can also upload source maps. So if I was an eBay developer, I could upload my source maps to replay so that every time I viewed a replay, I also had access to the original source code. Makes it a little bit easier to debug, but you actually you can still do a lot with the minified code in this case as well. So the first thing that I kind of saw is that there's this create message function that essentially logs what the event type is. And so we have 40 hits on this line. And if I go ahead and log to our console, and again, when you are logging to the console, you can not only are you logging the instance of that line, but you can also log values. And I'm going to go ahead and just refresh really quick here. I've had this one open for a while, so. All right, so going back to that line, so I can see here in my console, I'm going to go ahead and have my logs here, and it's showing 40 hits. We're going to go ahead and then also take a look at some of the other things that are happening. So this is essentially logging the type of event that runs whenever we're executing. And so we do have an event here called quantity validation output. And this validation output is essentially evaluating two parameters. And we can see them on the next line that it's evaluating is valid and selected quantity. So let's go ahead and take a look at that line. And we can see that that hits 5 times. We have 5 hits there. And I'm going to go ahead and log is valid, which is showing as essentially opposite G, and then, or bang G, and then D, which is the selected quantity. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Okay, so I can see that this validate function is running 5 times. We have edited our quantity box a certain number of times that does correspond to that. And we can see that it is valid when it's true when it's 1, but then it's false the rest of the times. So again, if we kind of, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see our viewer. And rewinding to this spot here, we have a quantity of 1 and validate is true. I fast forward here, validate's false, and we have a quantity of not a number. And so I kind of just getting a sense of why that is. If we take a look at this line here, where we're validating the quantity, let me see. Yeah, so we can see here, this is where this.global is, and we're publishing that. And then here we're validating the quantity, and we're validating A. And this also has 5 hits. And we can go ahead and do A here and save. And we're able to kind of see like this object that is associated with this validate function. So that's something where we can see like the is valid function. Disable quantity check is false. Disable quantity check is false. So that also corresponds to kind of understanding what's happening inside that replay there. And then here's where we're validating the quantity itself. So we have this equals A. And then on the next line here, we have like disable quantity check. And as we're able to see, that corresponds, if we fast forward here, that's going to be false each time. So we are doing the quantity check, and we're able to see that that validate is coming back. And we're able to see that the object there is coming back a certain way. But it's not corresponding to the actual anything else. So here we can see this publishing the quantity value output here. Selected quantity is D. If we scroll up a little bit, we can see like, where is this D coming from? And if we kind of look a couple lines up, we see here is that D is parse int of D and then 10. Again, we're kind of locked in at a certain instance right now. So if I hover over, I can actually see the value of D, and I can see that it's already not a number at this line. So it's not a number there, but it's also not a number here. So D is coming from a little bit higher up. So let's see if we can find that. So we see here that D is equal to the value of this kind of C object. And boom, here we go. So C is actually coming from A and then quantity box ID, that text box there. So if we do, and then we have autocomplete in the print statement box. So I can go ahead and just see here, and I can log that. And I can also log this value here called max quantity. And that's, the autocomplete's nice because it shows me what like items are available. And so here we have max quantity is set to 0 for each of those 5 hits. And then here we're actually evaluating that D. The next line after that, here we can go ahead and log D. And we can see that whenever we have this not a number, it correlates to an empty string. So we're actually parse inting an empty string, which is going to not a number. And so that's why it's showing that that's not valid either. There may be a better way to handle that. You know, if it's not a number, if there's nothing in the quantity box, just skipping over that next check. But that's where we're seeing like why that validation is failing, is because we have this validation output where we're validating the quantity, but we're not actually from there. We're preventing the add to cart, but we may want to example, like I said, like post a message or disable the button whenever that function executes. So yeah, so that's kind of an example of how, like, whenever you encounter a bug in the wild, like, you can record it, you can start to dig around with it. You know, this is something where we've actually sent like replays to support teams before and said, hey, like, you know, noticed a couple of things here. This might be a good place to start. And you don't have to be familiar with the code base in order to play around with it. Like I didn't make this replay. I'm not an eBay engineer. It's minified code. But by using a couple of searches, by following the flow, like you can kind of also see if you went into any of these specific functions, like you could also step in. If we wanted to come over here, you can highlight over here. We can see that the remaining quantity is still 1. As we step through each one, we can see the remaining quantity is 1. And so that correlates to, you know, our last one showing up here on the DOM. And that lets you kind of start to understand how the application is running, what's working with what, and how things are coming together in order to debug. So as somebody who is familiar with testing a lot of sites, but not necessarily like, you know, working on them in production, this is helpful for me too, to start to see some patterns of how like different types of sites have debug, you know, how they code their front ends, what types of functions that they use. And again, with the Source Explorer in the outline view, you can see all of the functions that are in a given file. So this is another way to kind of like start to dig in. So I can come in here and I can review these, and that's essentially where, you know, you can start to think about, okay, like this is related to quantity, like, you know, maybe there's something about like an error message and or whatever it may be. You can go through, so like an init message counter, you know, that's something that maybe we could take a look at to understand. We have a success function here, you know, taking a look and seeing how many times that's executed. We have an error function. Those are all different things that you can start to dig into if you aren't familiar with the code base. So we have this validate function. We have validate MSKU quantity. So this is actually, we can see here, this is where it's calculating the remaining quantity minus the quantity available in order to validate the quantity itself. So that's actually pretty interesting. So we have this like suppressed quantity is set to false, quantity available. And then here we have, this is where it's actually publishing validate quantity. So, so that's kind of interesting too. And that's like kind of coming up right above this. And then from there is where you're able to then see right underneath that validate function. So that function outline can also be a good way when you're encountering a new file, just kind of want to get your bearings and be like, what does this file do? What functions are included in it? And then again, when you are working on your own code base and you have access to those code heat maps, you can then see how many times each function was executed. If you can see that it was executed a bunch of times, you may want to drill into that one specifically. So awesome. Well, this is actually, we're going to be writing this up and sharing this on our examples page in our documentation. So we do have a, you know, in our docs, we have this kind of examples page that we use, and you can actually visit it pretty easily. It's just replay.io/examples. And this will let you take you right to this page here where we have videos, we have tutorials, and we also have some interactive replays. So the interesting thing about replay is because of those comments, you can add them right to a line of code. and you can show in a replay, how different debugging processes can work. So definitely check that out, replay.io/examples. If you ever wanted to see like real world examples of replays, how people solve bugs in the wild. And we are adding to this all the time. And if you ever encounter a bug and you use a replay to fix it, please let us know. Stop by our Discord, share that replay link with us. We'd love to add you to our examples page, and share that story. We also do publish our case studies, in our newsletter. Would love to share, if you're working on a project and you're able to find a bug, share that with our readers. So great. Well, thank you so much. This has been, a really great experience. Thank you so much for I saw some comments in the chat. Appreciate that. Thanks again to Josh for stopping by and talking to us about some of the kind of behind the scenes things happening on the engineering team with Replay. We will be going forward, having more guests on stream from the engineering team. So keep posted for that. You can follow us on Twitter at replay.replayio. You can also, again, follow us on Twitch and YouTube as well to stay posted. But yeah, if you ever have any questions, hop in the Discord or reach out to us on any of these channels and let us know. We're happy to help. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.